Hey, we are in Shelach Help. The Haftarah is Joshua chapter 2, verses 1 through 24. So when you read Joshua 2, if you haven't already, you are going to right away see what the tie-in with the Torah portion is, because both the Torah portion and this Haftarah talk about sending in spies to scope out the land. So in the Torah portion, we have the story of the 12 spies, and the bad report of the 10, and then how things didn't go so well for Israel after that. Well, the Haftarah takes place toward the end of this 40 years of wandering in the wilderness that happened because of the bad report of the 10 spies that Moses sent out when the people balked at coming into the land because of their fear of the Canaanites. Now, in the Torah portion, the 10 spies report to the people, and then the people all say that the giants in the land are too big for them. And because of that, we can see that they're missing a key faith element. Well, they're missing several, but I'm going to focus in on one particular way that the Moses' Israelites, that they still have Egypt in them. You can take Israel out of Egypt fairly quickly, but getting Egypt out of Israel takes a longer process, right? And I'm going to focus on this one particular one because I think that's one of the ways that I think you and I can still have a little bit of Egypt in us too. And maybe looking at a certain way that we have Egypt in us, maybe this isn't something that we usually think about, okay? So the question that I'm posing is this. Are we helpless to the whims of thought that others have of us? Or is God sovereign over even our reputation and the esteem that we have in other people's eyes? Okay? So that's not usually something that we think about. So this is what I kind of hope to convey in this lesson. That part of our journey with God, our wilderness area, is this sort of incubation medium, so to say, of faith in God in different areas of our life. Okay? So what I mean by that is that I believe God uses our life experiences to transform us from slave mentality, can't say that, from spiritual orphanhood mentality that we see shows up with the Israelites, what they experienced. But when we look for those things in our own lives, we can see that they show up there too. Okay? So one thing that sort of underlies everything that I'm going to talk about today is this idea that our God is all about transforming us. Okay? Now, in order for any of us to make any kind of lasting change in our behavior, we're going to need a transformation in the way that we think about and understand the world, how it runs. So one way to explain this idea of transformation is that it's an irreversible shift toward understanding the world in a different way, a new model of reality. Okay? So what's the new model of reality I want to bring out here in this Torah portion in Haftarah? There's a difference between the Israelites of Moses' era and those of the Joshua generation. Okay? Now, I would like to propose that one of the new models of reality that the Israelites needed to have, and you and I need to have, is something as simple as this. How others see you is up to God. Okay? So that's the paradigm shift that I think we're going to be talking about here and looking for. How others see you is up to God. That's what we're asked to shift to, but what's the starting point? What was it that the Joshua generation learned that the generation 40 years earlier needed the whole wilderness experience to get right? Well, for that, I think we need to go a little bit into the Torah portion in Numbers 13. And starting at verse 32, it says, the Israelites said, "The land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the sons of Anak. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." Okay? We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. And this is where the Israelites got tripped up, because they assumed that the Canaanites would see them as they saw themselves. So their worldview was something like this. It was, how others see me is up to them. Or like a variation of that would be, how others see me is how I see myself. So the question is, am I at the mercy of how others view me? Or is God sovereign over even that? Because the Israelites thought poorly of themselves, right? Against the stronger Canaanites, and they assumed that their poor self-image carried over to the Canaanites, what they thought of them. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. So as I go through the remainder of this lesson, I want you to imagine, so you can keep this in the practical, I want you to imagine an area or a situation or maybe a person where you seem like grasshoppers in your own a grasshopper in your own eye, and you assume that you look the same way to them. Okay? So whoever them is for you, I want you to think about that scenario in your mind as we go through the rest of this lesson. All right? You ready? Now, the generation that needed to wander the wilderness, the ones that were swayed by the bad report of the 10 spies, they assumed that the Canaanites would see them as they saw themselves. But remember the song at the sea? The one that the Israelites sang after God's miraculous splitting of the sea? Way back in Exodus? The Israelites, by their action of saying there's giants in the land, too great for us, they demonstrated that they didn't actually believe that God could cause the inhabitants to feel powerless against the Israelites. Okay? Now, Exodus 15, I think it runs through verse 1 through 19. That's the song at the sea. And then after that, Miriam's victory song starts. So you may be familiar with the verse 1. There's some messianic songs that use this. I will sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted, both horse and rider he has hurled into the sea. And then at verse 15 it says, and this is the thing to focus on, the chiefs of Edom will be terrified, the leaders of Moab will be seized with trembling, the people of Canaan will melt away. Okay, remember that, will melt away. So the spies and the ones to whom the bad report came, they had actually been there at the splitting of the sea. And it was there that they sang about how the people of Canaan will melt with fear. Now, they sang a good game, but they weren't able to transform their thinking and their behaviors into faithful actions. So when it came down to it, they didn't really believe that God could or would actually caused the inhabitants to feel powerless against the Israelites. So their worldview was, how others see me is up to them, or how others see me is how I see myself. Now, let me say something here. The physical reality wasn't what needed to be transformed here. Okay? Because it's true that the Canaanites were stronger and larger than the Israelites. So the 10 spies of the Torah portion, they weren't wrong in that. But where they fell short is in what they believed about God and his ability. We seem like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we look the same to them. So we need to get away from that worldview, that paradigm, and we need to get to this one that says, how others see you is up to God. So that's the paradigm shift, right? We need to get to the point where we truly believe with our actions that nothing happens in life that doesn't pass through God's sovereignty. So what that means is God is sovereign even in how others see you. So he can, and he did, actually cause the stronger Canaanites to melt in fear of the Israelites. And he can give you that same divine favor to appear how he wants you to appear to anyone in your life. Remember that scenario I asked you to envision, right? Because I think that sometimes we just strive too hard and too often trying to manufacture an image to other people, right? We usually are trying to pretend to be something that we're not, or something, we're trying to pretend to be something that we actually believe that we're not. And we do that so we can have like some kind of mastery over how others see us, right? So we think that we have to kind of sell ourselves. We have to project a certain image. We have to manipulate how we come across to others so that they'll, like us, take us seriously, or see us in some certain way. And I think that one of the things that we can glean from both the Torah portion and the Haftarah this week is that God wants us to know that he's sovereign over how others see you. So, do you have a job interview that you're nervous about? Do you have a conversation that's coming up you need to have, like a difficult conversation with a friend or family member? Is there someone in your life that you're always trying to impress? So where are you a grasshopper in your eyes? And how does that thinking influence how you think others see you? Because if you can remember to trust that God is sovereign in how others see you, then I think you're going to remember to ask him to cause the other person to see you truthfully. So back to the Torah portion. Now, the reality of the situation with the Canaanites should have melted with fear at the sight of the Israelites. Okay? The reality is that they should have, because how others see you is up to God. And it had nothing to do with military power, and it had everything to do with who the Israelites belonged to. And it had everything to do with the fact that God gave a promise of land to the Israelites and a promise that he would be with them. That was the reality, despite what they could see. Now, maybe you don't have a promise about a job interview, or you don't have a promise that this hard conversation will go a certain way, or anything like that. But you do have promises from God about who you are, right? And that's what he can project onto others about you. So you're not a grasshopper. You are segulah. That's a Hebrew word that means a treasured possession of the great King, our God. So God has conveyed on the Israelites and he's conveyed on you and he's conveyed on me a status, an identity, and a role a role to play, that we are representatives of him and his goodness to the nations. So the Israelite self-identity and your self-identity and my self-identity, that needs to be transformed to match how God sees us and what God says is true. Now, after this paradigm shift, in order to make new and lasting change, we need to come up with some actionable steps. Okay? So, let's see how Rahab from the Torah portion does just that. Okay, let me introduce you to Rahab. She is a key player in the Haftarah. There's so much that could be said about her. I could go down numerous rabbit trails, but I'm just going to stick to her report, the report that she gives to Joshua's spies, because in that report, we can pick out some tidbits that I think will help us make that worldview shift. Okay, so let me read starting at chapter 2, starting at verse 9, and we'll go to verse 11. So Rahab says to them being the two spies, I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you, for the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Okay, now, for transformation to take place, we need a new model of reality, and we need new habits for living. So let's look at Rahab's report within this lens. There's three key things that I picked out for you from this report. One is that God has given Israel the land. A great fear of Israel has fallen on the Canaanite people, and all here are melting in fear because of the Israelites. Okay? So these are the things that Rahab is proclaiming. And it's very interesting because she understands something that maybe Moses' Israelites didn't quite completely take in. She understands that God's promise to give the land to Israel is a foundational part of Israel's identity. Now, this promise is also reiterated to Joshua in chapter 1, verses 1 through 9. Moses' spies didn't seem to accept that as a fact. So it appears that Rahab, in this sense, had more faith in God that he would deliver on the promise that he made to Abraham, passed down Moses. She had more faith than the Israelites did. So she testifies to Joshua's spies about God's gift of the land. And she confirms that God has fulfilled his promise, a promise that we learn about in Deuteronomy 25, that he will put terror of, he says, I will put terror of you and fear of you on the face of all the people under heaven, so that when they hear of you, they'll quake and they'll tremble before you. How others see you is up to God. So the other thing that's interesting with Rahab is that so her statements of the awesomeness of God, that doesn't create fear in her. And she's a woman at this point outside the covenant of God. She's a woman of the people that Israel will conquer. But her statements lead her to faith and to proclaiming the message that God keeps his promises. Right? Now, as I've said before, to have this worldview shift, we need actionable steps. So some of them are that we need to know, like Rahab did, the history of God's reckoning with mankind, with his people, and with the nations, right? And that we also need to be intimately familiar with his promises. And that we need to speak about these things with others. We need to be willing to proclaim it. They need to be on our lips. They need to be retold over and over and over again. That's what we need to be talking about over coffee, right? So just as in the song at the sea, the song of Moses, Rahab recognizes that what has been said concerning the Canaanites, that all their inhabitants will melt away, she recognizes that it has come to pass. And she says, your God is indeed God in heaven above and on the earth below. Now, keep in mind that what God says about himself on the earth below is that he is the supreme king. So for her to make that statement, she's saying God is who he says he is. So Rahab's actionable step is that she is involving herself in proclaiming how God acts in history and who he is among people, right? And so that's something that we need to do. But she doesn't just recite facts. I mean, as wonderful as that is, and as extraordinary as that is for her to recite these facts about God, her being a Canaanite, right? But she goes even further than that. So here's another action step that she took, a new habit for living. She willingly participates in the ongoing story of God, right? So she doesn't just proclaim what he did in the past or what he'll do in the future, as vital as proclaiming those things are, but she partners with him right here in the present. And that's what demonstrates that she has no doubt in her mind that how others see you is up to God, right? For her, the matter is settled, and she acts on it accordingly. This is Hebraic faith, because she puts her life on the line and the lives of her family members on the line. Well, I guess you could say puts them on the scarlet or the red cord, right? And she aligns herself with the God of Israel. So speaking of that red cord, here's a little rabbit trail here. The Hebrew for cord or rope is tikva. Now, tikva is a what we call a homograph. So that's a word with the same. Homographs are words with the same spelling, but they have different meanings. So an example in English is bear, the animal, and bear, like to carry. Okay, so the homograph in Hebrew is tikva, which can mean a rope or a cord, and it also can mean hope. So this red cord is symbolic of the hope that she has in her coming redemption. And in this case, the redemption is that she and her family will be spared because she'll come under the covenant of the Most High. So she hangs a cord in her window and hangs her expectation on God. The word hope isn't, I think so. Boy, that'd be really nice. The word hope Hebraically is a certain expectation that it will come to pass. That's a little bit different way to look at the word hope. So basically, she's demonstrating with her very life and the lives of her loved ones that how others see her is up to God, right? Now, most interpretations say that she was more than an innkeeper. They say that in ancient times, women innkeepers were common, but they ran brothels. So she understands that when she aligns, so whatever her reputation was, when she aligns herself with the God of Israel, that her own status changes because of who he is, and how others see her is up to God. that kind of reminds me of Ephesians 2, where it says, consequently, you're no longer foreigners and strangers, but fellow citizens with God and also members of his household. So Rahab wants God's covenant, which includes protection for her. She believes in him with that Hebraic faith because her belief is active. She knows that God can and will and has caused her people, the Canaanites, to see the Israelites as actually more powerful than they really are, even though the reality isn't that way. So the Israelites in Moses' time, they assumed that they were like grasshoppers in the sight of the Canaanites because that's how they felt in their own eyes. So because they felt that way in their eyes, they assumed the Canaanites would see them that same way. But, God said, I've got other plans. And the reality is that he did indeed cause the inhabitants of Canaan to feel powerless against them, to melt away in fear. Now, one commentary that I read says that if you see yourself as an insect and you don't believe God has any power over how others see you, then you're an insect and you don't have any business fighting giants. But if you realize how others see you is up to him, then the giants are helpless against you. So, to conclude, I want you to go back to that scenario or that situation that I asked you to visualize in your own life. And I'm going to leave you with a question, or maybe two questions. Will you respond like the Israelites of Moses' time and believe that God can cause others to see you the way he wants you to see them? Believe that only in song? Or will you, like Rahab, proclaim that both in word and in deed? See you next week.